This video is on how to manipulate formulas to solve for a different formula, or to solve for a different variable than what the formula might initially be. So for example, if a formula was initially area equals base times height, and you're given the area and you're given the base, you can use your algebra skills to change the formula to solve for height. And in doing that, then you can take your area and divide by the base and get height and change the formula. So area is base times height, but height would be area divided by base. And so if we recall our algebra unit, how we solved equations, remember if it said to add something and you were trying to solve for x, you subtracted. If it said to multiply and you were solving for x, you would divide both sides by a certain number. If it says to divide, you would multiply. And if it said to subtract, you would add. And so in algebra, we always do the opposite operation to solve for an unknown. And we're going to use that skill in this particular lesson about manipulating formulas. So for example, this one here says to solve for the radius. And it gives us a picture and it tells us what the area is. So quick review that the area of a circle is pi r squared. So remember, we want to solve for this r. So we have to ask ourselves, how are we going to do that? Well, the first thing we need to get rid of is we need to get rid of the pi. Well, remember, this means pi times r squared. So how do we get rid of multiplying by pi? Well, we must divide both sides by pi. If we divide this side by pi and this side by pi, what happens over here is these pi's are going to cancel out. And we'll now be left with area equals the radius squared. Sorry, area divided by pi equals the radius squared. Then, that still isn't solving for r. It's solving for r squared. So now you have to ask yourself, how do I get rid of squaring something? Well, you get rid of squaring something by square rooting, and whatever I do to one side, I do to the other side. So the formula will actually be the square root of area divided by pi will be the radius. And so now all I need to do, I still need to give myself a little bit more space. So what I need to do now is I can substitute in what the area is. So if I do the square root of 200.96 divided by pi, I'm going to get the radius. When I punch that into my calculator, I get 8. And so that means that the radius is equal to 8. I guess radius is equal to 8 centimeters. Okay, let's go through what we do if we're given circumference. Well, on our formula sheet, we see that circumference is equal to pi times diameter. Or it's equal to 2 pi r, because 2 radiuses equals 1 diameter. And so we can replace the diameter with 2 radiuses. Again, the question said to solve for radius. How are we going to do that? Well, to get the radius by itself, to get r by itself, we need to get rid of this 2 pi. How do we get rid of multiplying by 2 pi? We divide by 2 pi. If we divide one side by 2 pi, we have to divide the other side by 2 pi. On this side, these 2 pi's will cancel out, and we're going to be left with circumference divided by 2 pi is equal to the radius. Then all we need to do is substitute in our numbers. And when we do that, we get r equals 4 centimeters. So all we're doing really is using our algebra skills and changing the formula from area equals or circumference equals to a different letter. So let's look at this last example here. Let's look at the formula. Volume is length times width times height divided by 3. How could we solve that formula for the letter h? So we want to get h by itself. The first thing that we need to do is get rid of this dividing by 3. How do you get rid of dividing by 3? You have to multiply both sides by 3. When you do that, the 3's will cancel out, and you'll be left with 3 times the volume equals length times width times height. Now, we want just the h. So that means we need to get rid of the length and the width. How do we do that? We divide by the length and the width. Again, on this side, these will cancel, and we'll be left with 3 times the volume divided by the length times the width equals the height. I've now rearranged the formula to solve for height. And so if I knew volume, length, and width, I could now find the height. So all you have to remember is to ask yourself, what letter are you solving for? What do you need to do to get rid of the other things? And you always do the opposite operation, just like we learned back when we were solving algebra equations.